Good day, everybody. Welcome to today's live monthly market update. My name is John Pasalis. My team and I at Realosophy help buyers and sellers throughout the Toronto area make smarter real estate decisions. As always, we like hosting this monthly update to chat about the latest trends going on in the Toronto area's housing market. What are the things we are seeing? What are the things that are going to impact the market? What are the things that we see on the ground? I'll go look at the latest statistics to kind of get a better sense of how the market looks compared to historical trends. This month, I'm actually going to be chatting, or I'm looking at my agenda, a little bit about what you need to know if you are buying and selling in this uncertain market. I think it's an important issue. We're going to chat a little bit of on-the-ground trends with Gus and Davin from our office. And as always, I'm going to have David Larock, mortgage broker extraordinaire, joining us to chat a little bit about the mortgage market, macro trends, everything that's going on in the economy, Bank of Canada changes. So we'll be wrapping up with that as always. And as always, we have Urmi Desai from Move Smartly, our team, on the call as well, who will be keeping an eye on your questions. So please post your questions in the chat if you have any, and we'll be going through them and answering them as best we can. And if you have any more specific questions, you can always reach out to me personally at askjohn@movesmartly.com. So let's kick things off by looking at the latest trends for the Toronto area's housing market. So when we look at low-rise sales, so detached homes, we had about 1,600. The typical 10-year average is about 2,000 sales. So we're definitely below. We're below last year, and we're below what we typically see for the month of January. So relatively soft, not insanely soft. Of course, 2009 was the lowest in 20 years because of the financial crisis. We're a bit above where we were 2 years ago, but relatively soft sales volumes. Now, when we look at the number of active listings for detached homes, we had about 5,000. That's above average. Typically, we have about 3,900. We are in line with what we would typically, with what we saw back in 2018 and 2019, or probably more 2019. Those markets were softer. The market was slow. So a relatively high volume of listings on the market for houses. So it's, when we think about the active listings and the number of properties in the market, it's not just condos. Obviously, houses as well are relatively high. And again, part of this is because the number of homes hitting the market are exceeding the sales, the growth in sales. And this is leading to a relatively high number of active listings. So active listings are even well above their 10-year average. We have 6,800 active low-rise detached listings. Typically, we have about 4,000. And again, the years where it's really, really low volume of listings is because the market's super competitive. So basically, anything that hits the market sells. And now we're in a slower market where a lot of what hits the market doesn't sell or doesn't sell right away. So inventory ends up piling up. And that's what we're seeing. Months of inventory, so the number of homes for sale relative to the number of homes that sell each month is increasing. So we have 4 months of inventory. Prices are pretty flat year over year at about 1.275 million. So I'm going to chat a little bit about the condo market. Condo stats on the sales side are also quite similar, very soft, 1,200 sales of condominiums. Typically, we have 1,500. But new listings and active listings are where things get interesting. New listings for condominiums are off the charts. Over 4,600 new listings of condominiums in January. Typically, we only see about 2,800, so just under 3,000. So high volume of new listings. Again, a lot of this is, investors just exiting the market, wanting to pull out, list their properties, move on, and sell. That is certainly one of the contributing factors between why new listings for condos are growing faster than condos are growing faster than houses. And when we look at active listings, similarly, just under 7,000. Typically, we see about 3,000 active listings. So more than double the number of condominiums we are typically going to see on the market in January. So that's really, it's this high volume of active listings that is contributing to this soft market we're seeing. And again, a lot like houses, months of inventory is trending up to about 6, just under 6. Prices are flat year over year, about 700,000. Obviously, they look like they're trending down a little bit. But again, once we look at seasonality and we're comparing January to January of last year, they're pretty much about the same. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on briefly is this idea of how do we navigate a volatile market? I met with a client, when was it, Monday or on the weekend? I can't remember, a few days ago. Everything's starting to blur. Who's trying to decide how he needs to upsize, needs to buy another home, and just timing what to do. Do you buy first, or do you sell first? And I see a lot of realtors kind of come up with these very broad views. You always have to do this in this market. You always have to do Y. And I don't know if that's a nuanced approach. Certainly, this is a time to be more cautious. But when we think about these decisions, do you buy first? Do you sell first? And how do you do it? It's really a function of several considerations. And the first is, what the type of home that you want to buy. Is it the type of home that comes on the market pretty frequently, where you're going to be able to find one if you end up selling first? It's not going to take you 2 years. Or is it a rare type of property? Or is it the type of home that gets a lot of multiple offers? So the type of home that you want to buy, of course, is the first factor. The second is the type of home you want to sell. Is it a difficult home in a difficult neighborhood in an area that takes a long time? Or is it the type of home where even in a slow market, it's going to sell quickly? Even in today's slow market, a quarter of homes are selling for over asking. Doesn't mean they're getting crazy prices, but the point is there are a number of homes and types of homes that are selling pretty quickly. So if you happen to have that, that's going to obviously be a function and play into what your decisions are. The other key consideration, of course, is the market conditions right now for the types of homes you want to buy and you want to sell. And I think this is the important factor where people make a decision today about what to do, but we need to constantly be revisiting this. Conditions change. Just because you choose one strategy, it doesn't mean you want to stick to that forever. And the final, of course, is your risk tolerance. What risk are you willing to take? And how do we mitigate the risk? And I think this is the most important thing. And when we think about we're dealing with clients, there are different strategies. Whether you buy first or you sell first, there are a lot of different things that we need to do depending on the approach to mitigate the risk. If you're buying first, which is what a lot of people do, it's not just buy first, buy the home, close our eyes, hope everything's well, and then once we sell, we start preparing our home for sale. There's a lot of things we need to do and be mindful of even before our clients buy, to make sure our strategy is right, to make sure we're mitigating the risk as possible. So I'm going to be, after meeting with this client, we kind of went through even half of the things that we wanted to talk about. I thought I'm going to probably do a private seminar on these issues, buying and selling in an uncertain market. I think it's challenging for people because you feel anxious when you, I think, don't know the questions to ask. You're not sure about how to navigate these issues. You're not sure about what you need to do to mitigate risk. So I wanted to do this private seminar where we kind of unpack all of the things that you need to be mindful of, and how do you take an uncertain market and become a little bit more empowered as a consumer, as a buyer, or as a seller, and navigate it more confidently rather than anxiously and worried. And I think this difference between navigating it confidently and anxiously has a lot to do. It's not just about what's going on in the market, but has a lot to do about how we interpret what's going on in the market and how we make decisions based on what's going on in the market, how we navigate risk, and how do we take advantage of a soft market if we are buying. So I think some of the things that we're going to be chatting about, if you want to jump on that, just shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. You don't have to say anything. Just put the word smart in the subject line. So I'll send you a note once it's, I'm not going to do it on YouTube because it's a little bit more in the weeds and very niche. So really just specific to people who are looking at buying and selling. So like I said, just shoot me an email with the word smart in the subject line, and I'll shoot you a note once I've kind of prepared everything and given some thought into how to frame this out for everybody. So that's a little bit about some of the things that are going on in the market right now. I wanted to bring on Gus and Davin from our office to chat a little bit about some of the things that they are seeing on the ground. And we have Davin on the roads today, navigating a snowstorm in Toronto. Good day, gents. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thanks. How are you?
Beautiful, beautiful. So yeah, as always, just wanted to kind of kick off, talk a little bit about some of the things you both and I are kind of seeing on the ground. We're sort of a month and a half into the new year. We've all have obviously buyer clients, seller clients. Maybe chat about some of the things we're seeing. Davin, maybe I'll kind of put it over to you. I don't know if you had anything kind of interesting stories recently that kind of jump out.
I I do. The the interesting thing we've had, and I know we've had a couple in our office, is the situations where we're listing properties, and we're not really listing them necessarily to get multiple offers, but what's happening is we're just kind of catching somehow. I mean, there are reasons, but like lightning in a bottle, just two offers at once. So we're listing the home for basically what we want. There's gonna be a range of negotiation room, that kind of thing. But it just comes to pass that we're getting multiple offers, and then there's this sort of there's a diplomatic way you need to deal with them. There's a way you need to kind of not necessarily play both sides, but to use the term is to actually you want to kind of do that to get the best outcome for your seller client. So I mean, I had one in Oakville where we were kind of just the nicest house out there, and it made sense as to why we got these quick offers. And I do know, John, you had something too, or yeah.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting you say that. I think the last four sales we had in our office, none of them were priced to get multiple offers. They were all kind of priced a little bit aggressively. They all got more than one offer, and I'd say listen, I mean, half of it is certainly luck. That's a
What
big
price
element
point
of
were
it.
these at? What price point were these all at?
Well, I think they're all different price points. They were like, I'd say homes, low-rise home just under $1 million. Another home close to downtown, like 1.6, 1.7. A condo in Yorkville, and then yours was in Oakville, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
different home types, price points, and markets,
Yeah, I think the
for
key
sure.
thing though is like, listen, I think the key thing with navigating this market in our business, and tell me what you guys think, is that 50% of it, 100% is luck. 50% is really just grinding, quite frankly. It is, doing things that we didn't have to do when the market's booming.
Calling
And by
every
that,
agent that showed it, having that
100%.
conversation, making them feel like they have a chance.
Yes.
I mean, you're not gonna lie to anybody, but you're gonna
No.
yeah, bring me the offer. You never know. I may not get enough,
Yeah,
etc.
Yeah, because
100%.
there's agents who have shown the property who are probably, we don't know, unbeknownst to us, on the fence, mulling it over. And when you kind of give them the ping that like something's percolating, it kind of gives them that little push that maybe they need, or maybe the agent needs to kind of get his
You got a
clients on the
nudge.
horse.
You got a
Yeah,
nudge.
the nudge, and like Gus said, making them feel confident that they stand a chance. And then while you're doing that, and you're trying to stall the current offer you have to bring in the second one. So, and I think for people in our industry, most agents aren't used to doing that because we never had to do that. You know what I mean? But it's a different market. Like you're only going to uh, get this result if you're hustling. You can't just get the offer, negotiate with your client, and not contact everyone, not pick up the phone, not try to bring in more offers. And this is, and in all cases, it's not like we got more than asking. I think most cases we got under asking because we're priced aggressively. But the point is having that second offer on the table gets you better terms, better price, better closing, better, in some cases, no conditions.
Yeah, not to toot our own horn, John, but like I've been with you now. I was just thinking about the other day, like 9 years, going on a decade. And I remember when I first started, and I think Davin will probably agree with me, when he first started, the way that we were shown, the way that we were trained, the way that things kind of worked was always, if you get, whether you get 10 showings at a listing or 42 showings at a listing, you call every agent, you text every agent, you email every agent, you get feedback, you connect with them, and it doesn't matter if the market is crazy busy or really slow, you do that. And I recall, again, many listings, and me and Davin, I think I've had this conversation before, where it's like, I had 64 showings. I sat there yesterday for 3 hours, called every agent, text them, emailed them, connected with, okay, you're not going to connect with all of them, but connected with 40 out of 60. And like 6 or 7 said, "Oh, offer dates tomorrow," and then they tell, "Oh, I'll tell my clients," and then another half a dozen are like, "I don't think we got a shot," and you're like, "No, no, no, I'm encouraging you, try, you never know." And then, just so there's like 12 conversations that if you would have never called, which a lot, so people, the viewers understand, when the market's super busy and you're getting 50 showings, it's hard to sit there and spend the time to call everybody. And
Yeah.
a lot of agents won't do that because they're like, I got 60 showings. I'm going to get 10 offers. Well, no, you don't want 10. I want 15 offers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And from the buyer side,
What I'm getting at is we've always done that. And so now we just continue to do that in a slower market, which I think helps us.
and sometimes it helps. Sorry, Davin, you're gonna say?
I was going to say, yeah, from the buyer side, the person representing you should be doing this as well, developing that rapport and whatnot with the listing agent. I can't tell you how many times, the offer goes to the person. Maybe, yes, the right terms and whatnot, but the correctness of the offer, the rapport you build, you have confidence in that person's buyers that they, are kind of speaking the right language and are gonna come forth and close that transaction.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the rapport's huge. And like to Gus's point, I think some people like hear these stories. And some agents here think it's like insane. Why would you try to contact people when you have 60 showings? In some cases, it's not just going from 10 to 15, like Gus said. In some cases, you have 60 showings and your offer night shows up and you got 2 offers. And you're like, what happened? Right? Well, if you haven't called anybody, you don't know what's happened. But when you're calling everybody and everyone's feedback is it's great, but we're actually all going to bid on this other home that's taking offers the same night as you. That is important intel. That is important information, because if you have like another 6 potential buyers, they all just happen to like this other home more. Well, the day after that home sells, there's another 5 people that are still potentially interested in your house, right? And it helps you navigate and decide what to do on your offer night when you only get 2 offers, knowing that there might be another 5 in the wings. So 100%, I think it's huge. And I think it's actually, as we said, more important in this market, because in all of those cases, the ones that we just sold recently, we got better offers because we were able to pull that second offer to the table. So it's a market for hustlers and grinders right now. So anyhow, Mr. Gus, anything pop up on your radar interesting?
No, I just want to touch on so buyers, even sellers, but mostly like the buyers that are out there now that are looking. I had an interesting story the other day where a former client kind of messaged me, and we connected over the phone. And basically the story is one of her children just got married, and they're looking to buy, and they decided to, although she recommended me, which is fine, yeah, they decided to go with an agent that they kind of knew in their circle, maybe someone their age and whatnot. I don't know the exact details, but regardless, they've been looking at homes, and the concern was the agent, who's a little somewhat new from what I understand, was putting in offers on homes with her child, and they were pushing back on putting a condition for financing in the offer.
The buyer's agent was pushing back on the buyer. Okay.
Yeah, the buyer's agents like, nah, we don't need to put a condition for financing. You said you're already pre-approved. This is the house. It's going to appraise everything. Kind of just very nonchalantly, and making it seem like if you put the condition, you're not going to get the house, which is nuts. I know we've heard these stories, and probably people have heard these stories of agents pushing their buyers to not put conditions, because if you don't have conditions, you have a better chance of winning the home. True, has a better chance of winning the home, but A, if you're a first-time home buyer, especially in this market, and B, if you're in a market like this, which is really slow, I would just put all the conditions you can, and take your time to cross your T's and dot your I's. And this is the time to where, you know, in the decade that I've been doing this, almost decade I've been doing this, this is the first time I'm seeing it where really, truly, you can take your time and do your homework, and you don't have to rush, and you don't have to feel pressured by the seller. And most of the time, although, you know, with the exception of a couple stories like yours, you're not competing most of the time.
Yeah.
So I found it really puzzling. I found it, you know, there's agents still trying to do that kind of stuff, and the message should be that buyers should take their time and kind of like, yeah, cross your T's and dot your I's and make sure that everything's good, and you don't need to rush in this market for the most part.
Yeah,
It's really market and product dependent too. So
Yes.
it really depends on what. Yeah, I mean, is he doing his job in you know, advising them properly? If it's like a 1-to-1 negotiation somewhere in, you know, Markham, Scarborough, sure, yeah, but
Durham
you know,
region.
yeah, okay, so yeah,
What was
100%,
that?
100%.
Durham region.
Durham
Oh,
region.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, 100%. Put in your conditions. You know, do it the right way, kind of the old school way, if you will.
Absolutely
Yeah.
no reason why. I don't care if the seller's like, we don't want any conditions. Well, I
They're
guess you
living
don't
in the
want to
wrong
sell your
year.
house.
Yeah, I think as a consumer, I think as a buyer, I think it's important to always question the professional you're working with. Doesn't matter who they are, pushing back. And I think it is important because you need to look after your own interests. I don't think you can blindly just assume someone is always doing the right things. And man, I don't know if I mentioned this in one of our sales meetings, but I ever since I finished school, I have a bit more free time on my hands. I'm always looking for things to do. So I started being an expert witness for real estate transactions that are going to court.
Oh,
So basically, you know, just disputes between buyers and agents and whatever, and just basically giving a legal opinion on who's wrong and what did the agents do. And it's just fascinating. I mean, obviously, I can't really talk about the details, but it's just an interesting experience as an outsider because you just see the problems that come up, you know, and I will say, and it's not always, you know, I know there's this narrative that agents are assholes and they do this and they're pushy or whatever, but some of the times it's just like they're just clueless because they're new, they don't have the training, they don't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? It's not all malicious. It's just a lack of competence. So you always want to be cautious, I'd say.
Or laziness.
what's worse?
Was that?
Or
What's worse?
laziness.
Or lazy, 100%. Yeah, super interesting. Urmi, I don't know if we have any questions from the chat.
We do. One easy but difficult one. Here, let me get to it. From Mr. Potato Head.
Okay.
Hi, guys. Wanted to get your general rule of thumb for how much house can you afford as a first-time homebuyer?
Oh,
Easy, right?
easy. Very easy. Okay, there's a very easy rule of thumb. I mean, whether you want to spend this or not, but there's an easy rule of thumb to determine roughly how much you can spend without pulling up mortgage calculators. And the easy rule of thumb is figure out what your combined household income is. If it's just you, obviously it's just your income, but if you're buying someone, it's both of your incomes. So your before tax household income, and then take that and multiply that by 4 to 4.5. So if you're making, say, 100 grand a year total, then the maximum mortgage you qualify for is in the 400 to 450 range. And then to figure out how much you can spend, all you got to do is just add your down payment on top of that. So how much you can spend is really just two parts. It's how much mortgage you qualify for, and then how much you have as a down payment. Now, going back to my original point, whether you want to spend, that's the max that banks will lend you. Whether you want to spend that much, obviously, is up to you, but that's in theory the maximum that someone would qualify for. I mean, and David could correct me, but I think that's roughly the right math.
Yeah, without getting to like TDS and GDS ratios and all that. That's the straight line version.
Exactly. Yeah, there are other rules. There's, you know what I mean, credit and a few other things, but that's just roughly back of the paper napkin.
Yeah. I mean, unless the the question was how much house in terms of like how much house, like the
Yeah.
volume of the house. I don't know. That's obviously personal.
Yeah. I mean, like, listen, in terms of volume, you want to buy long term. Like, you want to buy something that you can settle into. The number of people contacting me who bought a home 2 years ago, have outgrown it, it's just too small for them, and want to upsize is unbelievable. And I think it's a very hard position to be in because your hasn't gone up in value or your condo hasn't gone up. So you're in a home that you've outgrown. You've only had it for 2 years, so you don't want to be in that position. And this is where, we don't think about it, but sometimes the real estate decisions constrain our lives. We think of it as like this amazing thing. It's an investment. I make tons of money, but sometimes it is a constraint on our life. If we're buying a home that is too small for us and it hasn't gone up in value and we don't want to sell it because we might lose some money, right? So we want to be mindful to make sure that whatever decision we make, it's not constraining how we live or how we want to live in the future, I think.
Well said.
Beautiful, gents. Any other questions or any other thoughts?
Oh, sorry. None from the audience, maybe from the gentleman.
From the gents. Any other comments, Jews? Any other stories?
No, I mean it's just sluggish out there, and but again, there's lots. If you're a buyer, I mean, my comment to a couple of people that I've met with the last couple of weeks is, and they're interested in buying and they're trying to kind of figure out how to navigate the market. If you're looking to buy and you see something, yeah, get out there and see it because there's kind of it feels like a bit of a window. Is the window going to be a year long? I don't know. Is it going to be 18 months? But there's lots of inventory out there and there's lots of options, especially if for someone who doesn't mind doing some work, right?
Yeah.
Or isn't hyper focused on one specific neighborhood, couple streets. If they're
Yeah.
flexible, like a lot of first time home buyers are getting in. I remember when I first bought, yeah, there's 3, 4 neighborhoods I'd like to get into. I don't mind getting my hands dirty and doing some work. There's some good buys to be had right now, and there's some sellers that are out there that you can negotiate hard with.
There are. And I think this is, again, I think the difference between agents who are, I mean, like the story that you have, who are newish, maybe who have never only known a market where prices are rising, only known a market where you're paying over asking. This is a market where you can be a little bit aggressive as a buyer, where you can go way under asking, where you can try to lowball and test, especially a home that's been on the market for a while, to see how motivated the seller is, because you don't know until you try. And from my experience, I mean, just being in this business a long time, there's a lot of people who don't like doing that, agents in particular, because they don't like confrontation. Because there are some listing agent who will call you up and be like, what do you think this is? Why are you lowballing? Like pissed off, right? And not everybody likes being yelled at, right? So some agents don't want to be the person who's throwing in that offer. But listen, I mean, I think it's what you do. I think, I mean, obviously we don't mind being yelled at, but it is what it is. I think you just have to do what is in the best interest of your client. And of course, it doesn't mean that every home you need to lowball or should. It obviously is property specific, some that are priced aggressively, some that have been on the market for a long time. Like Gus said, there's definitely some opportunities out there. Some people that are a little bit more motivated to sell than you might think. So it's the time to, be greedy as a buyer. That's a classic saying from Warren Buffett. The time to be greedy is when other people are fearful. And I do think there's a lot of truth to that if you're a buyer in today's market. Urmi, we'll kind of see what other questions you have before we wrap up.
Yeah, you can't leave.
All right.
More questions are piling in here. All right, let's start with Predix. While I'm here, gentlemen, I figure I'd ask a fairly loaded question. Background: I'm 32, 850 plus credit score, 125 to 150K in yearly income, no debt, about 100K in cash available. Thinking about selling the condo and moving up north with the intention to buy a house to reno. Any specific areas that would make sense to focus on that is within 1 to 2 hours north of the city? I work from home and want to create a space for my mom who is looking to retire.
And I think this person goes on and says, I'm thinking of buying in Peterborough, Barrie, Kawartha region. I have a somewhat negative view of housing until 2028, thinking of waiting before making a purchase and continue living at the condo.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Thank you,
You
John.
missed
Yes,
that.
that is the end of the question. Yes.
I mean, this is a very specific question, and I think it's very hard to offer specific answers to. You know what I mean?
I think this gentleman needs a buyer consultation from Davin, who will probably guide him the right way.
Yeah.
And
If you're not in the
he knows those
Kawarthas, not
neighborhoods.
in
I know these
Peterborough, what are you talking about? You are closer to the Kawarthas in Peterborough than I am, dude.
Maybe not Peterborough, but yeah, I mean, I like Georgian Bay up there. I like that northern pocket there. But I mean, I've been up there a couple times, just day vacations. But yeah, I think there's great potential up there personally.
So, I mean, the short answer, of course, is sure. I mean, I think you just do what works for you. I'm not, and like this person said, I'm not bullish housing for the next year or two anyways. Like, I don't think we're going to see a crazy market. I think, in terms of where to buy, again, it's such a personal question, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I think you have to, like what we do, for example, I mean, just as an example of how we approach it when we're dealing with buyers who are buying in the GTA, right? Who are looking at a bunch of different neighborhoods, sometimes different neighborhoods in different municipalities and regions, right? So when we start our whole home buying process, we go with buyers on what we call a market education tour, right? And the whole point is not to go out and just buy a home today. It is to look at one or two homes in these different neighborhoods to better understand the types of homes, the size, the condition, what you're getting for what price, what the pros are, what the cons are, and then, of course, what the neighborhoods are like in terms of amenities, welcome, all of those things. And I think there's this process that buyers need to do before they just decide to buy a home. That is this research phase, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we do it because it helps to actually tour the homes, right? So I think that is what you need to do as a buyer. Tour a bunch of homes in Barrie, in Peterborough, in the Kawarthas, to look at the neighborhoods, look at the amenities that are important to you, and then you end up zeroing in on the pockets or the regions that you like most, right? And I'd say I would do the exact same approach in this case. Obviously, it's just in markets that we don't really work as much in.
And,
So
and John, sorry, Davin.
Yeah, if there's that much, it's that dynamic in the places you're looking, like not just do a market, like go take your family and go be in those places for like a period of time, a day, spend a day there, because you need to kind of absorb what the heck you're getting. If you know the Kawarthas, Peterborough, these places, cool. If you don't, I mean, it's gonna be a shock. Maybe you show up and you're like, well, Costco's like 3 hours away. What the heck? Like, that's an extreme kind of thing, but stuff like that.
No, it's not extreme, Davin. I think that's a smart thing. And what I always do is I tell people, if you're not, because they ask me, I'm not sure about the neighborhood. I can only give so much color to the neighborhood and describe what I know. Next time you need to go, I always say, next time you need to go grocery shopping, go do your grocery shopping in that neighborhood, and spend an hour.
I love that.
And then you look at the people in the grocery store, look at what's going on, then go find the local coffee shop, go have a coffee, or lunch. And just those 2 hours will give you a really good idea of, okay, this is what's going on in this area, and I think it's a good idea. It works. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I've sent clients numerous times to, be it Aurora, Newmarket, whatever it might be, and say, just go be there for a while.
Yep.
And it answers a lot of questions. I tell them specific places to go if I do know it, but at the same time, if you buy in a place and you end up hating being there, like who cares how nice the house is? It's going to just weigh on you.
Yep.
Thank you. And to wrap it off from Predic's, tying it back to the macro concern, I think what I want to know is your macro view as it relates to suburbs, buy or wait. So these areas are even beyond what we would think of, maybe with the exception of Barrie, as the GTA suburbs of Toronto, even further outlying. But is there something specific about that, John, that if we are entering a down market, that, not down market, but a flat market is something to be more aware of when it comes to the suburbs, or maybe not. And
Yeah, I think it is. There is a valid concern there because, I mean, those markets were the ones that accelerated, quite frankly, the most rapidly during COVID, like these outskirts. So, yeah, I'd be looking at how have price, and I don't follow the data, so I don't really know. So, how have prices there changed relative to the GTA? Because I think that's an important measure, right? Like you want to compare relative differences in prices and price changes. And have they declined more? In some ways, if they declined more than the Toronto area, that would be a good sign. Like a good sign is if you're a buyer because they've adjusted more, whereas if the Toronto area is down 20%, which is roughly what we are from the peak, and those areas are only down 15, like I would wonder if there's more softness. What is the inventory like relative to the sales volume? Do they have 8 months of inventory? So these are the things that I'd be looking at. It's hard. I would not. It's hard to sort of take a macro lens on these things because I think the macro factors are going to impact all of Canada and certainly some municipalities more than others potentially, especially if you're in a steel area or an aluminum area. But in these areas, I would probably look at the local trends to see if the market is currently trending down in those areas, right? And I think it's impossible to time it perfectly, but that might give you, I think, some lens into what the dynamics are.
Yeah, 'cause there's a difference between like the relative pricing, like as far as the percentage that things have dropped. And there's absolute pricing too, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if something is 1.5 and Toronto went down to 1.2, well, if that out in the far away in Scugog, if it's 700,000, it's dropped to 600. It's there's like there's like a floor of sorts.
Yeah.
So absolute price, like the true pricing does come into effect as well. Like if you just take sort of apples to apples, like 20% drop here, 20% drop here, at some point they don't math out quite the same.
Yeah, for sure.
all right.
Do we have any other questions?
I think the next one is around interest rates. So let's maybe hold that for after Dave joins us.
All right. Beauty. All right, gang. Thank you so much for joining.
For sure.
Great, thanks.
Till next week.
Hey, Dave.
Hello, everybody.
Mr. Larock, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to chat a little bit about your latest post, the Sword of Demosthenes. I mean, I don't see that very often in a blog post. So maybe you can chat a little bit about macro markets. I mean, I'd kind of written in our blog in my latest report talking about how all of these tariffs, everything that's going on south of the border, the biggest victim of all of this, and this is, something the Financial Times, Martin Wolf wrote, and I agree with him, is predictability in markets, in economy, in trade. And how is this going to weigh in? I mean, how do you see all of this playing out, from a macro perspective?
Well, none of it's good for the Canadian economy. Like you say, John, businesses right now are highly uncertain. Trump is a walking chaos machine. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to decide whether or not you should expand your production, now's not a good time. You just don't know what the market's going to be. And also, if you're looking at where to build your next plant and your choice is, do I build it in Canada or the US, with all this tariff talk, and quite deliberately by Trump, a lot of businesses will probably end up building that plant in the US. So it's bad for the economy. Now, the question I get a lot, John, is what will the effect of tariffs be on interest rates? And there's two sides, because over the near term, first of all, if Trump enacts tariffs, that raises the cost of everything we sell to the US. It doesn't affect our pricing at all, but it's bad for growth, and that would make the Bank of Canada more dovish, and it would likely also cause bond yields to go down. As a reminder, our variable mortgage rates move in response to the Bank of Canada's policy rate, and our fixed mortgage rates respond to bond yield changes. So bond yields are forward-looking. If investors think that we're going to have tariffs and the economy is going to slow, then they're more dovish about our economic prospects. Rates always fall during recessions. At least that's always been true in the past. And the Bank of Canada would also be expected to keep cutting its policy rates. So over the near term, Trump tariffs would cause economic weakness, and that would put downward pressure on both fixed and variable rates. If we enact counter tariffs, that will raise the price of everything we import from the US. That would be inflationary. Now, a one-time tariff increase on all our goods might not cause a big change in the Bank of Canada's policy rate, because the bank would look through that and say this is a one-off, and ultimately we're not going to change policy going forward because this is going to work its way through the system and ultimately not fuel broader inflationary pressures. But during COVID, we saw price increases related to supply chain challenges. And what happened is other businesses that weren't affected by supply chain cost increases, at least as much, saw the opportunity to raise rates because everybody was talking about higher prices. They were opportunistic. A whole bunch of other companies started raising their prices. That led to broader inflation, and that forced the Bank of Canada to respond. So if higher tariffs cause opportunistic companies that are not affected by the counter tariffs that we enact on US imports, if those companies raise prices, if they try to take advantage, that will lead to broader price pressures, and that will be inflationary. If we get inflation, the Bank of Canada is going to have to raise its rate. They have said over and over again, they only have one mandate, that is to maintain price stability. And ultimately, that means they have to keep inflation under control. So if inflation forces their hand, they will have to, number one, stop cutting, and number two, raise rates. But that's a down the road thing. Right now, over the very near term, it'll put some downward pressure on rates, both fixed and variable. Here's another thing, John, and this doesn't get talked about as much, but here's a little bit of a something that gives me a bit of comfort. Obviously, this will hurt us more than it hurts the US. Their economy is 10 times the size. But this is interesting. The US deficit to GDP right now is 6%, which is very high. That's usually only a level seen during the deepest recession. So basically, the US federal government for years now has been spending much more than it's taking in, and that is inflationary. Also, the US savings rate is now down below 4%. It's the lowest it's been in almost 50 years. So basically, US consumers are spending lots of money and driving growth in the economy, but they're drawing down their saving rates to an unnaturally low level, and they're also racking up a bunch of credit card debt. So even though the US economy is 10 times our size, and by the way, their inflation's gone up now for 4 straight months. It's back around 3%. Ours is 2%. So we have less inflation in Canada. Our household savings rate is much higher than average. So Canadians have much more dry powder to buffer against some sort of economic slowdown, if it's temporary. And tariffs, if they increase prices on both sides of the 49th parallel, would have much more impact on US inflation because the US economy has more inflation right now. So even though they're much bigger than we are and it would hurt us more overall, we are in a much better situation as far as higher savings rates. Our deficit to GDP ratio is 1.6 right now. That's the lowest in the G7. The US deficit to GDP ratio is the highest in the G7. So even though they're much bigger and it'll hurt us more, the US is more sensitive to inflation right now overall as an economy than we are. And they have less room to, for example, engage in some sort of government support in the event their economy slows as a result of tariffs. So again, not great news for Canada, but it'll hurt both sides. And relatively speaking, they'll be more vulnerable to price increases, even though they will be less magnified.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you talked about lower. So you mentioned, of course, that the variable rates driven by the Bank of Canada rate, which we see will be going down. Now, what about fixed rates? Bond yields have been trending down a little bit. You see those translating into lower fixed mortgage rates?
Interestingly, not so much, John. Normally, when bond yields go down, fixed rates follow. And we
Okay.
saw a big drop in bond yields when the tariff stuff really hit the front pages. Because remember, Trump was inaugurated and he didn't initially talk about tariffs. Then he said there were going to be tariffs. Bond yields fell. And after he came back and said, we'll give you a 30-day reprieve, although we're going to have these other tariffs on steel and aluminum, bond yields have stayed lower. So spreads are wider than they've been in a long time. And borrowers are calling me saying, hey, bond yields have gone down. How come fixed rates aren't dropping? And as I said in my two most recent posts, there are a couple of factors to consider. Number one, when bond yields fall because of an economic shock, investors who buy securitized mortgage assets from lenders charge higher risk premiums. Basically, the entire bond market wants a higher yield to account for the increased risk of the economic shock, which is driving yields lower. So basically, lenders borrow money with their left hand and lend it out with their right hand. And if their cost of funds goes up because they have a higher risk premium being applied, then they don't actually have as much room to cut their rates as they might in more normal circumstances because their risk premiums are rising on the cost side. The other thing is, if you're a lender and you're extending credit all the time, if you think there's a big economic shock coming and you are unsure of what the magnitude of that shock will be, your appetite for extending credit goes down. So yeah, you'll still lend money, but are you really going to fight for every last basis point? Maybe not as much. Maybe the appetite changes. The closest example that I can think of, John, and I gave this example in my two posts ago, was the oil shock in 2015. Oil prices crashed. Bond yields went way down. Lenders didn't drop their fixed rates. And even though the Bank of Canada cut twice by 0.25%, lenders actually only passed on a 0.15% of each of those 0.25% discounts. Borrowers went nuts, and lenders said, because the BOC is cutting because of this oil shock, and we think that's bad for the economy, we have higher risk premiums, and we're basically 10 of those 25 basis points is going to go towards restoring our profitability. A lot of pressure put on them at that time because the argument was, hey, when the Bank of Canada cuts rates, it's supposed to be a way to stimulate growth in the economy. When you're not passing on that discount, you're interrupting the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. But the lender said, too bad, so sad. We're doing it anyway. And that happened. So if we're talking about now, there's no talk of that happening now. It's not that I'm warning people that will happen. I'm just saying it could happen. And if we look to the past, the oil price shock in 2015, I think, was instructive about where lenders' heads are at right now. And that's why fixed rates haven't fallen by as much as bond yields have fallen by. And that's why, even if the BOC cuts in future, we may not see the one-for-one between BOC rate cuts and variable mortgage rates that we're used to seeing. It's a possibility.
That's interesting. Thanks, David. Urmi, I'm going to bring you on. I think we said you had a couple questions for David on interest rates.
Yes, I do. Hi, Dave. Just give me a second here to organize some questions just being split up here. Let's start with this one that we received a bit earlier. It's a question about the investors that are really being missing. They've been missing from the market. John, I think you've been writing and talking about this. So the question is, what would it take for them to come back? Is this interest rate the way it is? What would it, there's, as Dave's just talked about, the uncertainty of tariffs and relative reduction in population growth, which is another policy change enacted by the federal government prior to Trump taking office. So with all these things combined, when would we expect? It says developers are on the side, actually. So I'm not sure if this is, I think the question is actually related. Developers need the investors, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, that's just how Canada has been building housing by basically selling condos to investors. It's not the only way to build homes. It's the only way Canada's known to build, has figured out how to build homes the past 15, 20 years. So listen, I mean, I don't think the investor, I mean, I don't want to say the investor. I mean, I know investors who are looking right now who are greedy when others are fearful, but most Canadian investors, sort of the amateur investors, I don't see them coming back anytime soon. I think there's no appetite for it. Interest rates are too high. rents are falling, prices are flat, they may decline. I don't see it happening anytime soon. Like I suspect that market's going to be gone for like at least maybe even a couple of years comfortably before things kind of normalize.
So, John, I take your point that Canada the developers as well have relied on these investors. That's not necessarily the only way that the market should be structured. But if you've been depending on that segment,
Yeah.
at the more than the margins, I think, to really keep up prices, what do you think will happen with
Well,
developers returning to, for example, we know there's a standstill in new construction.
Well, I mean, you just convert your projects to purpose-built rental, right? I mean, and I think this is where policymakers are playing a role in making it more economical for builders to build purpose-built rental. But when we think about what the best way to build rental housing is, Canada's approach was the worst way, which is basically building condos that were bought by investors who would rent them out. And it leads to so much instability and uncertainty. We're seeing that play out now. It's better to have governments encouraging builders to build permanent rental housing, and they'll probably go along those lines in the future, I suspect.
So fair to say that when developers come back and these new construction comes back online, will it be more geared towards the buyer, the end user market?
Potentially. I mean, it's hard to say. Again, I don't think the investor market's dead. I think it's hibernating right now until things look better. But people will always want to profit off of real estate. I think it's just the conditions aren't there today.
All right. And maybe the last question to Connie for Dave and then John. What's your thoughts on the next rate announcement next month? I'm on variable rate right now and appreciate the rates dropping for the past month. Dave, I think you touched on that, but let's zero in specifically for the mortgage holders.
Okay, well, let me say the first and most obvious thing, which is that a lot of what the Bank of Canada does next is going to depend on what Donald Trump does between today and the bank's next meeting. And since he doesn't seem to know at 8:30 in the morning what he's going to do at 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't think a lot of us should be overly confident that we know either. But the bottom line is, I think the BOC is still on a dovish footing. Its policy rate is currently 3%. Its policy rate won't be at what we would call a stimulative level. Right now, it's considered to be in a neutral position. It's not restricting growth in the economy as much, but it's also not stimulating growth. I think we're going to need stimulus from the Bank of Canada before this is all said and done, and the bank needs to drop to 2% before we get to that stimulative level. So the bond market right now thinks we've got another 0.5% worth of cuts by the BOC in store. Those bets change all the time, so that is subject to that. That's a moving target. I personally think that the bank will drop by another 1%. The timing of when they do, I mean, I think that'll happen this year. What's going to happen next March? All else being equal, I think it's a good bet. We'll get a 0.25 point cut, but again, lots of water to go under the bridge. All the unpredictability of Trump. I would look more towards the end of 2025. And quite frankly, if you get another 1% off your rate between now and the end of the year, it doesn't matter as much if it comes in March or if it comes in May.
Beautiful. Urmi, any other questions before we wrap up our chat for the day?
No, I think that's a good note to leave it on.
Beautiful. All righty, gang. David, thank you so much for joining. Urmi, thank you for keeping an eye on all our questions. Thank you all for joining and for all your questions. As always, if you have any additional questions, more specific, you can shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. Otherwise, we will see you next month live on this channel. Thank you.